Looks like we're live. Hello everyone and welcome to yet another Azuzin session. How about that? Let's make a little bit of an announcement and officially start the stream. So a red circle live on Twitch. And what are we doing today on twitch.television as usual? Let me copy paste the title. Today we are developing the file browser for my text editor in OpenGL. This is such a This is such a weird title, but that's what you have to do on twitch.television these days. Alright, so let's actually give the link to twitch.television and ping everyone who's interested in being pinged. And there we go, the stream has been officially started. So today we're going to continue developing DET, which stands for Dramatic Text Editor. Right, it's a text editor that we've been developing for 2 years, right, with a pause. You can find the source code for this text editor in here in the chat. I'm going to copy paste it in the chat. And also for people who watch on YouTube, it's going to be available in the description. Hopefully, we'll see if this thing ever going to be available on YouTube. We don't really know. It's a mystery and apology. All right. So if we start the editor, so this is how the editor looks like, right? So it's called Dramatic Editor for a reason, right? So when you start the editor, this is what you greeted with. And when you start typing, like hello, chat, this is what kind of shit is going on, right? So essentially you have some camera action going on and stuff like that, right? So it can actually edit real files, right? For instance, we can try to open its own source code within the editor. I wonder if it's going to work. So let me give it a try. So this is going to be something like this. And I couldn't easily do that because I'm not located in the same folder as the font, right? So the text editor is unfinished. I hope it goes without mentioning, right? So let's actually do it like this. And this is how the source code looks like, right? So this is, I'm editing the text editor within the text editor, essentially. So this is basically what we have. The encoding is probably completely shit, right? But you got the idea. Hopefully you got the idea. So the problem is right now to open a certain file, right? To open a certain file, you have to actually provide the file in the command line arguments, right? So there's no way, like in any text editor, to just open the text editor and then within the text editor select a file that you want to open, right? So to be able to do that, we need to have some sort of file browser, right? Some sort of a file browser. And this is precisely what I want you to do today. I want you to spend some time implementing a very simple, like a first approximation of a file browser that then we can extend into more or less usable file manager, because as you know, modern text editor cannot exist without a file manager, because text editor edits not only the text within the files, it also manages the files. Without this kind of functionality, text editors are usually pretty useless, right? So and if you take a look at any modern text editor that is used for anything serious, for any serious development, like Emacs, Vim, Visual Studio Code, Sublime, they all have some sort of a built-in file manager along with the text editor. And in fact, file manager is sort of part of the experience of the text editor. So they're not inseparable in my opinion. So without that, the text editor is usually kind of useless. What we found over the years, over the decades of software development, is that you can't really separate those tasks, right? We were trying to separate those tasks. We tried to make like a separate file managers and separate text editors, right? And was hoping that maybe through the power of the shell of the operating system, we can kind of integrate them together. Doesn't really work that well, right? You need some sort of like a file managing capabilities within the text editor, though some people may you know, get by with like a separate file manager, but nonetheless. Anyway, so how we're going to be doing all of that? I suppose let me think, right? When I start the text editor, right, and it's empty, right? So what I want to be able to do, I want to be able to press some keys and basically open a list of the files, of the current file within the current working directory, right? And then I should be able to just go down, right? And there will be cursor that points at the current file and just select the file, and this thing should open the file. And at any point I should be able to say, okay, let's open another file, and it will open this file browser again, and I'll be able to select other file. And if I click and open a directory, it goes inside of the directory. You know what I mean? Right, so it's a very simple file browser, right? To be able to do this kind of shenanigans, right, so we need to be able to read the current folder, right? So we need an ability to just say, okay, list the files in the current folder so I can iterate them and see what they are. So usually it is done with, like at least on the POSIX systems, right? So at least on the POSIX system, it's usually done with drent, if I'm not mistaken, right? So drent. I know that the part of drent is opendir, right? Yeah, there we go. So as you can see, you have to include the file, the library called drent, and then you would have these kind of functions, right? So you should open a folder, right? You get a folder descriptor, right? And then what you can do with this folder descriptor, you can read the directory. And essentially what read directory does, right? What read directory does, it gives you the next file within the directory, right? So then you can decide whether it's a file or a directory and what else to do with that. And after you're done reading the directory, you close the directory, right? But this is very much POSIX things, right? So if you take a look at the standards, yeah, there we go. As you can see, all of that either POSIX or some flavor of Unix, right? So this is very much Unix thing. It's not going to work on Windows. Not like this text editor is working on Windows right now. It does not, but we kind of aim for cross-platform ability. So on Windows, you're using WinAPI for this kind of stuff. But what's interesting is WinAPI is kind of similar to this thing, right? So essentially you open a directory and you get some sort of a directory descriptor, directory handle, and then you find the next entry in that directory and then the next one until you reach the end, and then you close it. The API, the structure of the API is pretty much the same, right? And because of that, some time ago, I think I created a thing called minirent, which is basically implementation of a subset of drent for Windows. It was really long time ago, but I'm thinking, can I actually use this thing in my, yeah, there we go, here it is, a subset of drent interface for Windows. Would you look at that? Isn't that amazing? I'm gonna copy paste it in the chat, right? So here it is, and of course for anyone who's watching on YouTube, I'm going to put that in the description, right? minirent. So yeah, this thing is essentially like implementation of a subset of drent API, but for Windows. And internally, it is using Windows API, right? So as you can see, it just like includes the Windows. Yeah. So for example, if you open a directory, what it does, it just like, you know, calls the WinAPI find first file and stuff like that, and checks for the errors, and you know. And if you implement a code that works with minirent, it should theoretically work with drent as well. So what I was thinking is that maybe we can use this thing for now, right? So maybe we can use this thing. All right, so let me see. So what I want to implement, I want to kind of implement a similar thing to slurp file that we have, I think, in a simple renderer. I recently actually shuffled things around. Right, so I usually have a function which accepts the file name, and it basically reads the entire file into the string and returns that string for you. No need to mess with the how is it called, with the stream API, right? Read things by chunk, just like read everything into memory. I recently started to develop a thing which is similar, but for the folders, right? So something like read entire dir, right? Const char dir path, and this thing is supposed to return files, right? Files within within that folder. And what's interesting is that files is a classical dynamic array. It's a classical dynamic array that is appended by da append macro that we developed in one of the previous stream. All right, so if I go to, I think it's inside of the editor, right? So da append, yeah, there we go. So essentially, anything that is appendable by da append is a structure, right, is a structure that has at least 3 fields. It's items, count, and capacity. Items points at the beginning of the dynamic array. Count says how many items you have in a dynamic array, and capacity says how many items are allocated. And usually capacity is bigger or equal to the count, right? So we pre-allocate a bunch of more elements, so we don't allocate very often, because allocation is usually a very slow operation. You don't really want to do it very often, usually, right? So, and in the situation of read entire dir, files is a classical dynamic array that is appendable by da append. All right, so let's do it like this, type dev struct files, and in here we're gonna have items which are C strings. Here we're gonna have count and capacity, right? Count and capacity, and there we go. So read entire dir just reads all of the files into this dynamic array and returns you that dynamic array. Right, so internally we're going to use direct API to actually implement all of that, and I found that it just makes it a little bit easier to manage things, right? Because it's kind of tedious to open a file, then pull the files off of the handler and check for the errors and stuff like that, because as you read through the files, an error may occur, you have to handle it. It's easier to just like read the entire list of files, check for any possible errors, and then work with the list of files that you have. It's way easier that way, right? It's easier for the same reason it is easier to just like slurp the entire file and then check for any possible errors and just work with the entire file without worrying that you're going to cause any errors. Of course, there are situations when the files is too big, right, and the amount of files also too big, it doesn't fit into the memory. But in 2023, you have a lot of memory and you're not doing anything super special, right? Usually if you can't fit file into the memory, you're doing something very, very unusual, probably server-side backend development for some distributed system or something like that, right? So what we're doing here, we're just writing a text editor, so it's totally fine to just put things into the memory. Though in case of text editors, like you may have files that are gigabytes, maybe you don't want to keep them in memory, but the text editor is in early stages, right? We're developing for 2 years, but it's still in early stages, but it was paused. Anyway, you get what I mean. You get what I mean. Right, so let's just go ahead and implement that. So usually I actually like to not return this thing. I like to pass it via the pointer so I can return an error, because an error may happen. So what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to allocate the structure for dynamic array on the stack, right? You allocate it on the stack, and then this function is going to append things in there. What's interesting is that if you're going to recursively traverse the directories, you can basically keep reusing the same. I don't think you can actually keep reusing the same, because you're gonna have nested files. But yeah, maybe not. Maybe you can't reuse it, but it doesn't really matter. So anyway, let's go ahead and try to implement this entire function. So let me see. So the first thing we want to do, we'll probably want to open the directory, right? Open dir. So let's put it in here. So we're opening a dir path, right? We're opening a dir path, and this is the directory that we just successfully opened. If we couldn't open it, right, so it usually returns null. In that specific case, what we want to do, we want to return error null. Droka87 subscribed with Twitch Prime for 16 months with the message hello Droka87, how are you doing? Really glad to see you. Alrighty, so now Once we open this entire thing, the next thing we want to do, we want to read the dir, right? We want to read the dir. Right, so, and essentially we do it like that. So we provide the file descriptor and it returns us an entry, right? And an entry, I don't remember what exactly it returns. It returns a null on error and also when reached the end. So this is actually kind of tricky. The API is a little bit tricky to work with. If the end of the directory stream is reached, null is returned and error no is not changed. If an error occurs, null is returned and error no is set appropriately. So you can't just check this thing for null and be 100% sure that this is an error. No. You have to first set error no to 0, right? Then you check for this thing, and then if it's equal to null and error no not equal to null, only then you're 100% sure that it is an error. If it is equal to 0, that means we just reached the end of the file. Right. So, but at the same time, this kind of allows you to quite easily organize a loop, just like while this thing is equal to null, just keep handing this entire thing. Right. So, and in fact, we can just like do it like this and essentially to do handle ent, and then at the end you can easily check if error no is not equal to 0, that means an error has happened somewhere throughout this entire process, right? So, and then we can just return error no. Alrighty, so but what's interesting is that we also have to close the dir, right? So before doing anything in here, we have to close the dir, but that may mess up error no as well, because as far as I know, close dir also returns integers, so that means closing the directory can also cause an error, right? So you have to be careful, right? So you've got an error, and you can't just return an error. If you just close it, it may, you know, override error no, so you have to be really careful with that. You have to be really careful with that. So what does it return? And what's interesting is that it only returns an error in case of if you messed up and provided incorrect the directory descriptor, right? So that means checking for the error of close dir is more like an assertion rather than the actual genuine like error handling, which makes this API is even more clunky. Like whatever. Just POSIX be like that all the time. Anyway, so but usually it would be probably better to have something like you know, result, right? Something like result. Maybe initially I'm gonna actually make the directory equal to null specifically, right? So this is more of like a section where I allocate everything that I want to deallocate later, right? And then we're going to have a defer section, and in the defer section, if directory was allocated, we just close the dir and we always return the result, right? And essentially then we can just return defer error null, right? And if error no is not equal to 0, what we just do, we just return defer error null. There we go. Cool. So now, while this thing is not equal to null, we just need to append the file into the files, right? So we have this dynamic array and we just need to append those things in there. So, but I don't quite remember the structure of the dirent entry, right? So let's actually take a look. Read the dir, right? So here is the read dir and dirent. So I suppose I'm not really sure what's useful in there, but the most useful thing is going to be dname, right? It's a null separated name in here, right? And this one is a little bit more interesting as well, because we don't know where exactly this thing is allocated, Like, we literally don't know where this thing is allocated and whether the string that we actually pushed into this dynamic array is still going to be available after we close the directory. Right, so one of the things we'll probably have to do, we'll have to copy that string. We'll have to take ent dname and copy it somewhere. But the question is where, in some sort of like a dynamic memory or whatnot. So what I like to do, I like to have some sort of like a temporary arena, right, and just put this thing in a temporary arena. But to have an arena, I have to implement it first. Luckily, I already have it implemented somewhere in one of my libraries. Right, so that should be pretty straightforward. So let me take a look. I think it's setting arena.h. I think that's, or is it just arena? I don't remember how it is called. Yeah, there we go. So it's just a simple arena implementation. You can find it in here. I'm going to copy paste it in the chat. And for people watching on YouTube, I'm going to copy paste it in here, like arena. Let's put it this way, simple arena implementation, right, in C. I don't know. Maybe just arena. Yeah. So yeah, it's of course STB style, a single file library and stuff like that. So essentially what you can do, you can just like create a global variable arena, right? And you can just like allocate into that arena, and then you can instantly deallocate everything that was put into that arena. Right, it's pretty straightforward. And implementation is super simple. I think it's also very small. It's not even 200 lines of code, but in the future I actually want to make it bigger. I have a lot of ideas and plans for this thing. For instance, right now it is implemented in terms of libc, so it just uses realloc of libc. But in the future I want to actually have versions that use mmap and virtual alloc directly, depending on the operating system you are in, right? Whether it's a POSIX operating system or Windows operating system. And also I would like to have a support for WebAssembly, right? So I want to have implementation that works directly with heap base, right? So with the heap base that is provided by Clang when you compile to WebAssembly, right? So it basically will allocate its pages, because Arena is basically a linked list of pages, right? It's a linked list of pages. So essentially it can just append its pages into the heap base. And then if you have a code that works with this Arena, you can compile it for Linux, for Windows, and also for WebAssembly without changing anything, because like the allocation of the memory is sort of abstracted away from you. Right, so I have plans like that. Maybe I'm gonna do that on the stream. I mean, it sounds interesting. I also had plans for rewinding the Arena. Right, so essentially you append the data into the Arena like to the end, right? But at the same time, the data in the Arena is still fragmented. It is still fragmented by the pages, right? So what I was thinking is that I would still want to have some sort of like a save state of the Arena and then jump back to that state, right? So essentially you can save the current state, then allocate a bunch of stuff, and then rewind back to that state, deallocating everything you allocated after that state, but don't deallocate things that are allocated before that state, right? So, and that will require remembering what was the current page at the time and where is the cursor within that page, and just restoring that somehow, right? So it's not as easy if you just had a continuous buffer where you could just like rewind the cursor to the buffer to that specific place. You have to also restore the page and the cursor within the page. Right, so it's a little bit more sophisticated, but I think it's doable. Like saving state of the Arena, rewinding Arena has proven, at least for me, like very useful. I used that technique when I implemented memory checking for Porth, right? So Porth uses like this kind of Arena, and it actually very actively saves the states of the Arena and resets them, but it uses linear memory anyway. Like checkpoints, yeah, like checkpoints, some sort of a checkpoints. So, and it's super easy. Just remember the page you're currently in and the cursor within the page, right? And when you need to rewind, you just set the last page to that page and the cursor to that step, to that place, and just basically wipe out any pages after that, right? So something like that. All right. So, but all of that for the future, right? All of that for the future. So for now, I just want to integrate the arena into my project so I can have a temporary place, right? So I can like have a place where I can put my temporary strings, right? So let's actually find the row, right? So I just want to download this thing in here. I'm gonna put it in here. Let's put it like that. I'm not really sure where exactly I'm gonna put all of that, but I'm gonna just basically assume that I have a temporary arena somewhere here in a static memory. So this is basically my assumption. There we go. And that is basically it. But the question is, do I have in the arena anything that can like move a string in there? Because I want to be able to str dupe this thing. So I want to be able to have something like temp str dupe. Right, so this is going to be char. Maybe even const char, but I mean it doesn't really have to be const because we're like allocating memory anyway. Right, and here we just provide a string. So I want to be able to do something like this, basically duplicate the string, but it should put it into the temporary arena in here, right? So it's not implemented yet, of course. Right, so let's put unimplemented and temp str dupe. Right, so and essentially now I want to do da append files, and what I'm going to append in here, I'm going to append dname, but I can only append if I do tmp str dupe. Right, first thing I do, I basically duplicate the string, I put it into the temporary arena, and then I append it into the files, and we're good to go. And that's basically the entire function that I want to have, right? So just read the entire thing. And let's try to go ahead and compile this entire thing. But maybe I'm going to try to implement tmp str dupe first. So the thing we need to do, right, so we need to allocate enough memory for this string. So I'm going to go and just provide allocate into temporary arena this amount of bytes, and the amount of bytes is strlen of s, but actually +1 for the null terminator, right? We want to have a null terminator. Right, so, and let's have something like char dupe. I mean, let's call it ds, it's a duplicated string. Right, and essentially what I want to do, I want to do mem copy. So mem copying, let me see, so this is going to be mem copy. So the destination is first, right? So the destination is first. We're going to put ds in here and the s in here, and let's factor out the string length to n, right? So this can be set to n, right? n+1. We copy n precisely, and then at the end of the duplicated string, we probably want to put 0, like so, and then we're going to just return ds. Hope I didn't make any mistakes in here, but that should be fine. All right, so let's try to compile this entire thing, and it should not compile because I made all sorts of assumptions that are completely wrong, right? They are in fact completely wrong. For instance, we don't have an arena in here, right? So we can try to include the arena as the header, right? But we don't really know where exactly it is going to be located in terms of like implementations, right? So because we have a separate compilation in here, so we'll have to decide. So error no, as far as I know, I already had error no defined somewhere. So did I have error no defined somewhere? No, I didn't actually. All right, so there is some stuff that I put into the editor, things like unimplemented, right? Things like unimplemented, unused, da append. Where's da append? And this is the stuff that are available in some translation units and not available everywhere, but it's actually useful everywhere. So maybe I should introduce something like a common.h where I'm going to actually put all of that stuff. Common.h, define, and if. And let's actually move everything in there. So let me find unimplemented. So we're gonna like literally put it in there because this is a header. Okay, and another thing, da append. So this is the definition of da append. it is going to be put in here. There we go. And the question is, so I also want to put the temporary arena there as well. Right, so I want to actually put it in there, but the question is, how can I put it? So it's a static thing. So you know what, I think I'm gonna only expose this specific function, right? And how exactly it is implemented in there is gonna be a mystery, right? So we're not gonna reveal how exactly it is implemented in there. Okay. So we probably want to have something like common.c as well, and we're going to include common.h. And let's copy paste this thing. So we're going to have a static memory in here, then implementation of that function in here. And what's interesting is that reading stuff from the directory is pretty much also a common thing. So maybe I'm going to pull it into the common translation unit as well, right? So let's actually put this thing in here, and this is going to be this thing. And since it's another common thing, let's also define error no, right? So this is going to be error no. The implementation of read entire dir is going to go to here. Arena. And I think the implementation of the arena is going to go into the commons. So I'm going to actually define arena implementation in here. Arena implementation. Okay, and also I want to put slurp file into the common here as well. And for the sake of sort of like consistency, I kind of want to call this function read entire file. So now we have pair of function read entire file, which reads entire file into memory, and read entire dir. I think it makes a lot of sense. What do you guys think? I think it does in fact makes a lot of sense. Like read entire file. I think it's kind of cool. But then we'll have to go through the compilation errors because we still refer to this function as slurp file in some of the places, but that's totally fine. And also let's actually move this function in here. Right. So, and this one is going to be a read entire file. All right, so let me see. So let's try to recompile this entire thing. I think also return defer. Do I use return defer anywhere? I don't see return defer defined anywhere. So I'm probably using it for the first time at all, which is kind of interesting because I remember I think I used return defer in the editor, but apparently not. Okay, so this is something that we'll have to implement at some point. Right, let's go through the compilation errors. Okay. So DI append, we don't have DI append in here because we want to include the commons because this is where it is defined, common.h. Common.h, and what? Okay, so there is a mistake in common.h. Yeah, so it's kind of funny. You forget to put semicolon in one file in C, but it complains in a completely different file. Right, so mistake is within this file. It is literally within this file, but it complains in here. C and C++ as well. Right, and it doesn't even refer to that file anywhere except maybe somewhere here, but thank you very much, C. Very cool. I mean, I wish C was like a good language. Unfortunately, it is not a good language, so you have to deal with this kind of shit all the time. Preprocessor, am I right? Okay, so read entire is declared as a static, right? So we don't want it to be static. Okay, so and as already mentioned, we use still the old name slurp file in some of the places. So read entire file. So is there any other places where we refer to all of that? Okay, so initialization, make a pointer, blah blah blah. Implicit declaration, so it doesn't know about this thing, so let's include common.h. Let's include common.h. Okay, so now it refers to read entire file, but it fails with the link error. So that means it knows about this function, but it cannot find the actual implementation. So let's include common.h in the translation news in here, right? Common.h, and probably also maybe have to update MSVC. Right, so let me see src common c. I'm not sure if this script even works. Okay, so size t, it doesn't have a size t, so we have to have stdlib.h. There we go. So we have, all right, so that's cool. It still says that we have undefined reference to read entire file. I'm actually surprised because, wait a second, I specifically, because I said H, not C. So did I make the same mistake in MSVC? No, in MSVC I actually didn't make such mistake. That's cool. All right, other problems, strlen. So this thing is located in string, so we have to include the string.h. What else do we have in here? I can't see shed and dismissed. So what do we have? strlen. Okay, so it's still complaining about strlen. What else? Dir. Okay, so this is where it's interesting. We need to include dirrent. All right, but again, this is a very much POSIX thing. This is a very much POSIX thing, so we have to be a bit careful in here. Okay, return defer. This is exactly what I was talking about. So it doesn't have return defer, but let's actually define it in here. Return defer. This is a value, and we're gonna do. So we have to set the result to that value, and then we go to defer. And then we just do it like that. Okay, so then we do compilation. What else do we have in here? Error no. All right, so let's include error no. So I want to put it to do in here. Use mini rent in here on Windows because I feel like after I'm done with the compiler assisted refactoring, I'm gonna forget to do that, right? So it's kind of important to use mini rent in here just for the Windows folks, right? Okay, read entire file, static declaration. It's not static. What else do we have in here? So this is a file. This thing requires std lib. Maybe we also want to include stdio. Just in case, you know, the usual stuff. And it compiles. Okay, that's pretty cool. That is actually very, very cool. So one of the things I want to do now, I want to do alternative entry point. And in that specific alternative entry point, we can try to read entire current directory, right? So read entire dir and read this one. So I'm going to also create a files dynamic array. So for this thing to actually work, we probably want to do something like common.h, right? And we provide the pointer to the files. Then we have an error, right? Inf error not equal 0. Doesn't it remind you something, right? Doesn't this style of programming remind you something? Printf std error error could not read directory. I'm going to provide this thing and the directory. Maybe it makes sense to actually put this thing something like dir path, right? So, and it's going to be just a dot. Yeah, it's from Go. It's a very Go-ish way of programming, and this is because it's a C-ish way of programming. Many people confuse this kind of style with the Go style of programming, but the Go actually inherited that from C. This is how you're supposed to handle errors in C, right? So not everybody knows that, but yeah. What commands move the row up and down? This is not a vanilla feature of Emacs. I actually installed some extensions, but I don't remember which one. So for me, it's Alt P and Alt N. You know, Control P and Control N up and down. But if you use Alt, it moves the current line in Emacs. And this is an extension. But I'm pretty sure you can just implement it yourself. But oh, I think I remember Emacs Crux. I think, yeah. So this one. So a collection of ridiculously useful extensions for Emacs, right? And one of the functions it has is move line up and down somewhere, and you just like, you know, just map it to whatever thing you want, right? So this is the thing I use. I think this is the thing I use. I can actually check it out, by the way. N. Yeah. Next text, move text down. Oh no, wait a second. It's not crux. It's a move text down. And it's a separate extension actually. There is extension to move text. Freaking left pad. Emacs move text. Yeah, so apparently there is an extension for that. But it's in a standard repo, I suppose. Yeah, I think it's this one. I think it's this one. Anyway. All right, so dir path, and then we do str error no, and then I'm going to just return my like 1. And after that, so we need to iterate through all of these things we have in here, right? So files count. I'm going to just print all of the files that we've got in here. Files, items, I. Look at this API. You want to read a directory, you just read the entire dir into an array called files, and then you just iterate those files. That's it. So if you want to, for instance, go further, you just take one particular file and you concatenate it, right? So you concatenate it and then just do read entire dir again. So yeah, and all of the complexity, all of the weirdness is just like tucked under this function, so you don't have to worry about it too much. Okay, so let's actually try to recompile this entire thing, and it doesn't compile, of course, because it doesn't know about error no. Let's do error no. I wonder if I'll have to also include the string, probably. We'll see. No, I didn't have to. Okay, so if I run the executable right now, it should just list the files in the current directory. Right, and these are the files in the current directory. So if we take a look at the list of the files, here they are. Right, so we can programmatically get the list of files. Right, so the next thing we just need to do is to render that list of files in an OpenGL buffer, right? So this is already half of the job, right? It's already half of it because we just access this thing. And look at that, I forgot that I needed to replace rand with mini rand. Yeah, I almost forgot about that. Right. So let me take a look. Common.c, and essentially, yeah. Oh, they even have an example in here. I mean, I implemented the shit. All right, so this is what we want to have, and let me just take the mini rand in here. So basically, you know, for Win32, just use this one. What's up, District Computers? How's it going? Really glad to see you, my friend. All right. It's very nice of them. Yeah. You know, the developers of this library. The developers of this library are so nice, if I do say so myself, right? All right, so let's try to compile this thing and see if it's going to compile. Look at that, it has compiled. Who would have thought? Okay, so I think before I go and take the list of files that we read from the file system and render them in an OpenGL buffer, right? So this is the OpenGL buffer I'm talking about, right? So this is the text file. So essentially I want to have a kind of similar situation in here. Just take a list of files and just, like, you know, render them as you would render text in here. But we have a little bit of a difference in here because we'll need to also implement a special cursor to point at the current file. Right, so and I'm thinking what's going to be that cursor. Maybe it's going to be like a frame around the name of the file, and by pressing up and down you just move that frame and you can select that specific file. Right, so, and yeah, this is basically what we're going to do. And then when you selected the file, press enter, the editor should open the file. It should read it into the memory, just display it and do the usual thing. So yeah, that's basically the idea. That's basically the idea. But before we can do that, we need to make a cup of tea, so a break. All right, So let's go ahead and try to display the list of the current files, right? So where are we going to be displaying all of that? I think in the main loop, right? In the main loop, we are constantly displaying the editor, right? We're constantly displaying the editor, right? So as you can see, we render the editor, providing the atlas of the glyphs and the simple renderer that we use to render everything. So what I'm thinking is that if we had something like a variable that controls what exactly we are currently doing, like let's call it file browser, right? If we are currently in a file browser mode, we need to render the file browser somehow. Otherwise, we are in the editor mode. We're in the editor mode, and we are rendering the editor, right? So that's what we do. And we want to switch between these modes somehow by pressing some sort of a key. So we already have like F2 to save the file, which is okay. The keys are very much unusual, but this is because all of that for debug purposes, right? So it's just like for debugging. The keys can be changed at any point, so none of that is final, of course. This should go without saying, but on the internet you have to constantly say that because people don't understand. Alright, so if we press F3, so what I'm gonna do essentially, I'm gonna just do file browser, right? So not file browser. So we basically flip-flop between the file browser and the editor, file browser and the editor. Right, so, and let's actually introduce this Boolean thing. File browser by default is going to be false. Right, so by default it is disabled, and let's try to compile this entire thing. Let's try to compile this entire thing, and if I try to start, so as you can see, we do have the editor. So let's actually type some stuff in here. So it's going to be like that, and I'm about to press F3, right? And it all disappeared. Everything just disappeared. But then I press F3, and it appeared. And this is because we switched between the file browser mode and the text editor mode. Right, so now we have two modes. Right, we don't render anything in the file browser, but that's exactly what we're trying to do right now. We're trying to implement that. What's interesting is that once we switch to the browser mode, we only switch the rendering. So look, if I press F3, everything disappears, but if I tap now hello world and press F3, it says hello world. So that means it handles the keys still in the text editor mode. So we have to somehow change that as well, I think. So MDDG Wizard, I hope I pronounced your nickname correctly, subscribed for 1 month with tier 1 subscription with a message. I changed my name. Can you guess who I am? He take care chief. I don't know who you are, but thank you so much for subscription. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so all right. Now, how are we gonna be doing that? So I feel like I want to maybe redirect some of this stuff to the editor, I suppose. Or maybe we can put all of the handling behind this thing as well. But that means we also will have some things that are very much common between the modes, like handling the quit. So we'll have to think how we're gonna do that. So Evil Rocket 216, thank you so much for tier 1 subscription, with a message of colon equals. That's literally what it says. It says colon equals. It's a walrus operator or double dick operator. So thank you so much for double dick operator. I really appreciate that. Okay, so so if we do key down, we can also do it like that. I mean, if file browser, we're gonna do one thing, otherwise we are handling it differently. Right, so I can put it in here, and there we go. So to do file browser keys. There we go. And similarly, when file browser, but what's interesting is that we don't really need to type any text in the file browser, right? So I'm not sure if it's particularly useful in there, but we'll see, right? So I'm gonna just put it like that. File browser keys. File browser keys. So Lorry Master reset for 34 months with Prime, saying another double dick operator. So this is another double dick operator. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all the double dicks. Right. Thank you. Really appreciative of dicks. Okay. Now I want you to just compile this entire thing and see if it actually changes the behavior. Right, so might as well just do dead. Dead. Okay, so I'm gonna switch to browser mode and say hello chat and switch back, and nothing. Oh, okay. Yeah, so it's very interesting because yeah, I switched it to the browser mode, but since I don't handle the keys in the browser mode, I couldn't switch back. Right, some of the things I will have to do now is basically switch event key. And of course, this entire way of handling keys between the modes is lame. I do realize that. No need to tell me that this is lame. I know that. This is intentional. This is absolutely intentional, and this is because it doesn't matter, right? So what I'm trying to do right now, I'm trying to have something working. As soon as I have something working, I gather enough information to drive the development further and make it better, right? So what I'm doing, I'm just gathering information in terms of how it's gonna look like, right? All right, so what we have some text in here, and I'm switching to the browser mode, and I type hello chat, and then I switch to the text, and nothing went through in here, so here we have the thing that we always had. Okay, cool. So now, right, now as we switched to the file browser mode, I suppose one of the things we have to do, we have to actually collect the files, right? So do we still have that alternative entry point that I implemented? So we already got rid of it. Okay, so that is totally fine. Let's introduce the files for the file browser, right? So files, and they're of course 0 initialized. So let's find F3. And this is F3 in the text mode. Okay, so if we are in text mode and we're switching to the file browser, interestingly, so we use toggle in here, but we know for sure that the file browser is false in here, so we can always just put true, right? And we can always put false in here because we know what's the current state, so it's kind of redundant. I think it's kind of redundant. So let me double check that it is working. It is working. So this is files. And we switch in between them. That's cool. Right. So, and what I want to do in here, I want to, on pressing F3 while being in a text editor mode, I want to populate the files, right? So, but I want to first clean them. So I'm going to set their count to 0, indicating that I'm going to clean whatever we had there, just in case. I also feel like it makes sense to clean up the temporary arena, right? So maybe we're going to have a function temporary reset. We already have tmp strdupe. Maybe we're going to have like a family of functions that start with tmp and all of that for temporary stuff, right? Temporary reset, right? And then we repopulate this entire thing. So I'm going to do read entire directory, and the directory that we're currently working with is going to be dot. So this is the current directory, and we're populating the files. And if this entire thing returns an error, it's kind of an interesting question. what exactly do we do with that error, not equal to 0. It would be nice to report that error somehow. For instance, maybe by flashing a message to the user, right? So what essentially means is that we couldn't read this entire thing as the directory, but does it mean that we have to crash the entire text editor? I don't think so. Right, so one of the things we can do actually, right, so we can put else in here. Yeah, there we go. For instance, if an error has happened, we just do a pop-up or we flash like something happened, but we never actually switched the file browser because we couldn't read anything. Right, but if everything was successful, we just switched there. So, but the question is, how are we going to be indicating all of that? That's a very interesting question. It would be nice to have some entity, something like flush error, right, where I could maybe just print something, could not read folder that because of that, right, something like this, and maybe directory char dir name, dir path, I would say. So this is a dot dir path. I can't see anything. Dir path str error, which is really bad for internationalization, of course. And that is basically it. So, and what I would expect here is that it basically makes a pop-up in the center of the screen saying could not read directory, or maybe there are going to be some sort of a log at the like a left bottom corner, right, which is not affected by the camera, and which simply just, you know, displays whatever error has happened, but doesn't really crash the editor. So I think that would be actually kind of nice, right? But I don't think I'm going to be implementing it right now, right? So we're going to be, of course, implementing that a little bit later. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to just create a macro for this entire thing, right? Something like this. So flush error. So of course we're going to have fmt, and then the arguments in here, and we're going to put something like std error fmt va args, and there we go. This is going to be just like redirecting to the standard error, right? So but maybe in the future we're going to actually display that right on the screen. So I'm going to put it to do display errors reported via flush error right in the text editor window somehow, right? So this is what we're gonna do. So this is gonna be to do. Alrighty. And once we implement this mechanism, we can use that mechanism like pretty much for anything. If some sort of an error happened within the text editor, we can just log them somewhere there. I noticed it always looks the same when you compile stuff in Emacs regardless of the language. Does Emacs have its own build system? It has something called compilation mode. Emacs compilation mode. And this is, in my opinion, the killer feature of Emacs. Like, as many text editors as possible should have something like this. But you may say that maybe your text editor, maybe your favorite text editor has something like that, but I've never seen any text editor actually integrating this thing into your process so seamlessly. It's just like it feels very, very naturally. So essentially you have command compile. You type command compile and you can put any command, any shell command in here, absolutely any shell commands in here, and it will basically act like a terminal, right? It just executes a command and it takes the logs and it displays these logs in here, but there is a catch. It recognizes common diagnostics of the compilers, right? So it has a bunch of regular expressions for very common diagnostics of the compilers and interpreters, and it's capable of extracting the file paths, the lines and stuff like that, and turn them into clickable links which I can click and actually jump into this place, right? And it also has a bunch of key bindings that allow you to not click by mouth, but by actually key bindings and stuff like that. And all of that is super easy to integrate into your flow. And what's interesting is that it doesn't really matter what you put in there. For instance, grep may generate things that look like compilation reporting. For instance, if I want to do something like grep and find all of the instances of like main, right, so, and of course I want to do that recursively, right, so there we go. So this is, it found the file path. But then if you provide the end flag, it will also provide the line where it happened, and now it looks like the diagnostics of the compiler, which you can actually click on. And what's interesting is that I'm using the same mechanism of Emacs for compiling things and for searching things. It's literally the same mechanism. It's just a thing that allows you to provide the command, and it prints the output and it parses it and it finds these diagnostics, and that allows you to click on them and actually jump in there. And you can get very creative with that. Like anything that outputs file path, colon, line, colon can be parsed. You can put it in there. So, and it integrates pretty much with any language, whether it's dynamic, compiled, whatever, it's a language, it's some other tool. Maybe you can actually put some of these diagnostics in the text file, right? So for example, places.txt, I'm gonna put that in here, and I'm gonna like put several of them, so I have it like that. So here's the places.txt, and then I say in a compilation mode cat places. I'm gonna just cat this entire thing, and it recognizes as well, right? So it actually recognizes it as well. So, and it just works. It doesn't care. It just takes the output and it parses it and gives you that. So what's interesting is that I think you can even have like a minor mode for that, so you can have it outside of the compilation mode, but that's besides the point. So yeah, that's what it is. So Vim has something similar, but it's so inconvenient to use. Holy shit, it's just like not convenient to use. What's interesting is that I like this thing so much that I decided to make it as a separate application, separate like from Emacs application, so compilation mode. So I call it CM. You can find it in here. I'm gonna copy paste it in the chat for anyone who's watching on YouTube, right? So it's not really finished, but it's pretty much the same idea. Right, so essentially if I go to dead, right, and I have something like grep, and I try to search for main, for just main, right, so I probably want to go to src, and I'm searching for main. Then I say, okay, so I'm gonna run it through CM, which stands for compilation mode. And there you go. So it didn't really work because I didn't do it properly, but yeah. So essentially it ran the command and it allows you to press on it, and it actually starts Vim, and it runs Vim so your cursor is located at that specific place. So essentially what I did, I separated the compilation mode and the text editor, right? So now you have compilation mode separately, and you can use it with whatever text editor you want, right? So let's actually try to do some other things. Right, for instance, if I try to find more, like 4, like every time, yeah, we encountered 4, right, so here all of the places where we encountered 4, I can actually jump there, I can do something in there, and stuff like that. So, yeah. So essentially what I try to recreate Emacs experience outside of Emacs. So because I think compilation mode of Emacs is absolutely freaking genius, like the flow that it creates. Like the actual flow that it creates is absolutely genius, and I've never seen it in any text editor like that. You can say that Vim has something like that, but they make it extremely inconvenient to use. Whatever Vim has is extremely inconvenient. All right. So anyway. Right, but it's all unfinished, so it's more of a, like, how to say that, it's a sketch. It's more of a sketch of an idea, so I do not recommend to use it. So it was 2 years ago, actually, right? It's a very interesting sketch with like 500 commits, but this is because it's written in Rust. Yeah, it explains it. It actually explains it. Okay. Whatever, doesn't really matter. So we have that. So let me just do this. So TMP reset, we don't really have TMP reset, so I need to implement it. So where is the TMP? Okay, so TMP str dupe, TMP reset. So common.c. So, and when we're resetting, it's essentially we're going to be setting the count to 0. Right, we're setting the count to 0. So is it count actually? Oh, I think Arena has precisely, yeah, it just has a reset. I forgot that it's not a linear thing. Right, so we have to use Arena reset. Right, we have to use Arena reset. There we go. So that's gonna be it. That's gonna be it. So, and it doesn't, yeah, of course. Okay. So if I go in here, so everything's fine. So now what I need to do when I'm rendering, I need to take the list of files and I need to render them as the text editor, right? So let me see how we can even do that. So to know how we can even do that, we need to take a look at how we do that in a render editor. Right, so we're rendering things line by line, and we can do it in a similar way, I suppose. Right, we can do it in a similar way. So what we do, we grab the size of the window, right, that's kind of important. Right, then we set the, then we use the simple render. I'm not sure if it is useful that much, right, because I think we can do that only once at the beginning of the application, right, because we don't really switch the vertex buffers or anything like that, but I mean it can be fixed, all of that like a little bit later, it doesn't really matter. Then we update the uniforms and stuff like that, and then we set the shader for epicness, right, so it's basically the rainbow effect. It's basically the rainbow effect, and what we do, we iterate through the rows of the editor, right? But now I feel like we have to iterate through the rows, through the files, right? So we're iterating through the files. We're iterating through the files. Okay, so here we are looking. So what is a begin? So begin is where the line begins in a space, right, in a two-dimensional space. And then we have end. And then we render the line, and rendering the line also gives us the end in here as well. Okay, so that's actually pretty cool. So we can copy-paste this piece of code in here, right, we can copy-paste this piece of code in here. Right, so I think... where is it? Okay, so I'm gonna put it. And here we also compute the line, the width like of the line and stuff like that, but I don't think it's that important for the file browser. Right, and then we just flush the renderer. Right, okay, so that's cool. We just flush the renderer. So here we compute the cursor position. This doesn't really matter that much. And then we update the camera. So for now, I'm going to actually copy-paste updating the camera. Right, so all of that is going to be compressed after I actually figure out what's needed here. So it doesn't really matter. Okay, so let's try to compile this entire thing. And I'm pretty sure it's not going to compile because it's probably using some local variables that are not available in some places. Oh yeah, so this is not particularly convenient because this is C, right? And in this specific context, SR is not a pointer, it's a value, right? But I copy-pasted the code that considered it a pointer. So, you know what, maybe it would make sense to actually create like a separate function, render file browser, right, along with the render editor. It will just make copy-pasting the code between these two contexts a little bit easier, render file browser. Right, so we're gonna have SDL window, right. So this is going to be SDL window. So what else do we need? We probably need the atlas and the simple renderer, and on top of that we need the files, right? The files that we are rendering. So though we don't really need to pass by this thing, I'm pretty sure, but let's actually pass it by a pointer. But also the constant one, because I don't plan to modify it. Right, so, and let me just grab this entire thing. Render file browser, and let me just put it in here. Okay, so this is going to be the atlas. Okay, so now we don't have to worry because all of that is in there. So editor. Oh yeah, so now we, instead of like using the editor stuff, we have to get the file path, right? So let me see. So this is basically files, items, row, right? And the length, well, the length is basically strlen of that thing because it's null terminated, if I'm not mistaken, right? So it has to be null terminated. Right, that should be enough. Let's give it a try. So max line, okay, so maybe we have to integrate max line. Max line is basically, you know, you saw that it zooms out the longer you have the line, so this is basically about that. Right. So I was thinking that maybe in the file manager we're not going to do that, but it's just easier to copy paste it anyway. Alright, so but maybe it makes sense to actually just keep it for all of the modes, for the sake of consistency, if you know what I mean, right? For the sake of consistency. Right, so let's just put it in here. Yeah, so this is going to be that. And let's see if it compiles. So cursor position, it uses cursor position to advance the camera, I suppose, but I'm not sure if it's that important. So in case of a file browser, we don't really have the cursor position yet. So that's kind of a problem. So cursor position. So maybe for the cursor position, at least for now, I'm gonna say, okay, so consider cursor position to be 0, 0. All right, doesn't matter. Because then later, yeah, later we're gonna just have special file browser cursor position. That's what we're gonna have. Okay, so it seems to be compiling. So let's now run that. So exploit to subscribe with Twitch Prime. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm gonna press F3, and as you can see, here is the list of files. But since the cursor is set to 0, 0, we can't really see all of them. Right, and it's also not sorted, right? It's in whatever order the operating system gave us to us. So maybe one of the things we want to do after, you know, reading, we want to sort them, right? So that would make sense, actually. So Voidman Jer, thank you so much for tier 1 subscription. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And then I can go back. That is actually very cool. I really like that. Look at that. Right, so this is just the text, and then we go to the, you know, to the file browser mode, right, and then go back to here, and it's just the camera. This is actually cool. This is cool. Like, that's so cool. I really like that. So once I finish it, it's gonna be even cooler, I think. You can make some epic Hackerman scenes with this. Yes, of course. Arena for Sin City? Yes. So that's why we're champions of the arena, because we made our own arena.h. Okay, So that's very cool. So we need to keep track of the cursor. But now you may say that for the file browser state, we have list of files and we have a current cursor. This already smells like a separate structure, right? Struct file browser, where you would have files and the current file, something like cursor. So, and maybe this is what we have to migrate to. You know what I mean? Right? So, and depending on the cursor, right, we're gonna render everything accordingly. So, another interesting thing, another important thing I would say, we need to sort the file names after we read them. Read entire dir. Right, after it was successful, what we have to do, can I just use qsort for sorting all of that shit? Qsort. I should be able to. I'm pretty sure I should be able to. I can, yeah. So it actually integrates very nicely with the strings. So I can do files items, right? So the amount of things I have is basically count, and the size is essentially files items, like this. And comparison is basically strcmp, right? strcmp. Yeah, that should be it actually. I think it should work. Let's give it a try. Hope it's going to work. So there's some incompatibility because this has to be dot. So we got a bunch of gifted subs by Zen Mystic. Thank you so much for gifting 10 subs. Thank you. And everyone who got the sub, welcome. Alright, strcmp passing. So we didn't like. Is that because I don't have a string? That's probably why. Let's actually provide it like that. Yeah, nah. Okay, it kind of worked, but at the same time, it didn't like the. Okay, so from incompatible pointer, yeah. So there is some incompatibility. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of similar, right? So it expects the function that accepts const void, but we pass something that is const char. Is it that big of a deal? Is it that big of a deal? Maybe it is, actually. Maybe it is. Yeah, so you can't easily do that because we need to take a pointer to the char, right? So pointer to the char, so it's not that easy to do. We need to have something like int file cmp const void a const void b, and we have to keep in mind that this is actually pointer to the character, right? So that's quite important. So let's call it something like p, right? And const char a is going to be ap const char pointer, and then we have to do something like this, right? I think this is how we have to do that. I feel like, and then I can do strcmp a and b, right? strcmp down there, file cmp. I might be wrong, but it compiles, and it sorted it perfectly, right? So as you can see, it kind of worked. Welcome to C, by the way, right? And I'm not even sure if it's gonna, like, you know, at some point destroy my entire memory, because who knows? Right, because who knows? Okay, cool. Let's actually introduce the file browser. Just a second, I need to close my front door. Not really front door, but one of the doors. Don't don't really want to hear, don't really want to let KGB agents hear me speaking the language of the enemy, you know? Right. They may think I'm some sort of a foreign agent. Or maybe am I? Who knows? Okay, good. I ran out of tea, by the way. Okay. So let's start using the file browser. Right, so let's call it FB. Let's go to the compilation errors as usual. Right. So FB file count. What else? Is that it? Is that it? I can't believe that's it. So files is a pointer. Did you mean? How is that a pointer? Are you freaking crazy? It is not supposed to be a pointer. Yeah, there we go. Right, and then we do FB, we just read the files. FB items. And we'll have to actually prefix FB for all of those things in here. So this is going to be FB like that. But also, on top of that, I need to set FB cursor to 0. Right, so we're going to be pointing at the first file. So then we do files. Actually, I have to put FB in here. Render file browser. So what do we accept in here? We accept file browser FB. Okay, FB files. What else do we want? FBA, not FBA. So this is items, and I have to... Classical C. I'm just shuffling around arrows and dots, arrows and dots, dots and arrows, arrows and dots. Thank you, Dennis Ritchie and Ken Thompson, for such a beautiful, beautiful language. My God, this language, this language aged like a fine milk. I'm telling you. Anyway, so what we're gonna have, depending on the cursor, right? So we use a cursor position, right? So I feel like I need to put the cursor position somewhere here, right? And when the current row is equal to the FB cursor, this is where we have our cursor position, right? So essentially we're setting it to the beginning of the line. Right, this is what we're doing. Okay, so that's fine. And one of the things I want to do, right, when I press up and down in a file browser mode, I want to update the cursor, right? So this is how we do that in here, right? So where is the file browser? Yep. So essentially, if I press up, I decrement the cursor, right? If FB cursor is greater than 0, I do FB cursor -1. It's that simple. If it's down, I check if FB cursor +1 is less than files count. I just do +1. Okay, so that's basically what we have in here. And now we can't really see the cursor, but we should be able to feel its effects. I can now go down, I can scroll through those things. So the only thing that is left in here is to actually render the goddamn cursor, right? So the question is, how can we render the cursor? That's a very interesting one. I think the easiest thing to do is to maybe like put a rectangle behind the text, if you know what I mean. Right, so let's do something like cursor. So we'll have to set the renderer, the shader for color, so we can render the color things. And we'll have to do Okay, so I'm actually in the wrong place. Right. Where is the file browser? Where is the file browser? So I'm setting the shader for the color. Right. So here's the for the epicness, and this is for the color. So that means I'll have to iterate like twice to figure out the cursor position, if I understand correctly. Right. So that's one of the things we'll have to do. That sucks. So because we can only figure out the cursor position after we figured out everything, but not really actually. So we know the cursor position from here. So this is the cursor position, isn't it? Yeah, that's literally what it is. I didn't know why I'm doing this stupid shit. I didn't have to do that. I can straight up tell you. Okay, so where's the cursor position? I can just say 0, but in terms of y, it's FB cursor, right? It's FB cursor, like this. So that means here, I can just like straight up remove that. Okay, and as soon as I have the cursor, position, what can I have? Let's actually try to render a rectangle there, but I'm not sure about the width of the rectangle, if you know what I mean. So I'll have to... I need a way to compute the size of the line, but without rendering the line. That's what I need to be able to do. Do I have something like that in a free glyph in here? Right, so I can render the line, but I can't compute the size of this thing. Okay. Free glyph.c. And one of the things it does, it just advances your position in here, right? It just advances your position. I don't know why I keep drinking. I ran out of tea in here. We need something. So basically this function, but without this part. Right. That's what we need. We just need this thing without that part. Maybe we just have to put like a boolean in there. Like a boolean here that says render. Right. But that means I'll have to update each individual place where I use the I use it only in 2 places, so it's totally fine. Right, if render, do that. Okay. If render, do that. Okay, cool. So what else do we have in here? So what does it say? Conflicting types, sure. What else do we have? So we are in the file browser, right? So in here we probably want to do true. That is understandable. So that's precisely what you want. And here we are in the editor, and here we also want to have true. Okay, that's totally fine. So now what I can do, I can render the cursor, right? So I can start with the begin. And the begin starts at the cursor position, right? So this is literally the cursor position, right? And the end is going to be this, and this begin. And here is a B cursor, but we don't render this thing. We just don't render. And this is kind of important. So we may have the situation when the amount of files is 0, but the cursor is also going to be equal to 0. In that case, we should not render anything. We have to check if FB cursor is less than FB files count, only then try to render, right? So because this is going to be false in case we didn't read any single file, right? In that case, we may have a buffer overflow in these specific places, right? So in here, so that's kind of important, I think. Right. Okay. So here we figure out the left and right boundaries of this thing, and that should be enough to render a quad. I believe so. Right, that should be enough, or at least render some sort of a line. Right, so let me actually go into the simple renderer. So immediate, not really immediate, simple renderer quad. Right, so that we're gonna have, and we just need to render the quad. Okay, so if I remember correctly, this is how the vertices of the quad go. Right, so this is how they go. So begin is here, end is here. Then we have to do begin, but plus height of the glyph. Right, glyph font size, I suppose this is what it is, right? Right, it's gonna be begin, but plus that thing. Vec to f add, vec to f 0 glyph. Let's call it something like height, maybe h. Vec to f. So, and in here, vec to f and h. In terms of the color, we have to provide the color for each individual vertex. So maybe quad is not particularly useful. What if I just use solid rect? Is it going to be easier for me? I feel like it's going to be a bit easier. Right, because then I only have to provide the begin, and then I have to compute the size, but the size is going to be rather interesting. So it's going to be vec to f. The x is essentially end x minus begin x, right? But in terms of y, it's the free glyph font size. I think that's how we can do that, right? And then I only have to provide like a one single color, which is going to be just one, right? So none of that is needed, none of that is needed, and this is basically the cursor, right? So essentially, what do we do? This entire thing sort of like accepts the begin point in space where you start rendering the line, and then it gives you where it ends. This is needed for non-monospace fonts, because fonts can do all sort of funky stuff, right? And they can end up somewhere else, right? And basically you say, okay, if you render this thing here, where it's going to end up, and it gives you where it's going to end up. And then you can compute the width of this entire thing and the height and stuff like that, right? And basically what we use it for, we use it to compute the rectangle that we're going to render behind the current line, something like that, right? So maybe, by the way, I didn't think I want to make it white. I want to make it sort of like grayish, 25 maybe. Like 25, 25, 25, but alpha is going to be just like 1, right, because it's not going to be possible to see anything behind here. All right, so let's try to compile this entire thing, and of course it's not going to compile because some stuff. Okay, so what do we... I can't see shit in this mist. It's not 2f, it's 4f. So, yeah. Alright. And now I'm gonna press F3. And nothing is happening. I wonder why. Probably because I didn't flush the renderer. That's probably why. Right, because we rendered some stuff. We set the shader, we rendered this thing, so that should be fine. And one more time. Here it is. So yeah, it's a little bit scuffed, but you get the idea. You can scroll through the files, sort of. Okay, isn't that cool? So that's pretty cool. You know what will be cooler? I think we should use not the... So for now, for the center of the camera, we're using this specific point, this specific corner in here. I feel like we have to use like the center in here, right? We have to use the center. That's what it feels like, at least. Okay, so cursor position. So for the cursor position, we use it in 3 places. So I think what I'm gonna do in here, I'm gonna just use this stuff, and then I'm gonna do cursor position in here. So this is the cursor position. But in terms of like X, man, it will depend on the current line. So the cursor position has to be computed in here. Damn. Okay. So let's actually keep it in here. Because then I have to say cursor position X is going to be equal to this specific thing, but divided by 2. Right. Something like this, I think. It's kind of weird, but I mean, why not? We're just experimenting with the thing. Okay, so essentially it should use like literally this center of the rectangle for the camera. So that means depending on the length of the line, it's gonna adjust the camera accordingly. So as you can see, it adjusted and it tries to keep the entire line in the center. Right. So, and depending on the length of the line, it's gonna just like do it like that. So you can see the entire line if you want to. Does that make sense? Probably. It's kind of... I'm not sure if it's a good idea actually, because it's kind of... So maybe it's a bad idea. So let's not do that. Right, because it's like... You know what I mean? It's a little bit better when it's like that. Another emergent behavior. You guys think it's a good emergent behavior? When it's... I kind of don't like... Look. Like, I mean, especially if you're just like scrolling through all of that, it's kind of... don't particularly like it, but we'll have to think how to work with all of that. Okay, anyway. So while we're selecting a file, a certain file, we may press enter. And this is where we have to read the file. Right, we have to read the file. So case SDLK, return, or I don't remember. I think it is return. Yeah, there we go. And what do we have to do? If FB cursor is less than FB files count, what we have to do, we have to try to open that file. We just have to open that file. How do we open the file? Right, so at the beginning, where is the file opening action? So we recompute. Editor, load file, yeah, there we go. Oh, we are literally like opening the file like so. Why didn't I tuck the process of opening a file under this function? I mean, it's just like temporary thing. Right, okay, so sure, let's give it a try. Cool. So, but a file path in this specific case is going to be file path, set path, FB files items, FB cursor. There we go. So this is the file path. We're going to try to open it, and if we couldn't open it, it's going to crash or something. Okay. So I think after that we have to do file browser and put false in here. Right, so let's give it a try. So obviously, if we're gonna try to open something big, it's gonna crash, but can I try to open license? There you go, I opened the license. That's pretty cool. So then I can try to go and... That's so cool, holy shit. I can open build.sh, and here's the build.sh. Okay, there's some things that I don't particularly like in here. Right, so there's some things that I don't particularly like. Again, I don't like situation, so let's get rid of it. You know what I'm talking about. The yeah, this one. This one. We don't have anymore. So that's fine. If I try to open something really weird, like the executable itself, like the dead itself, yeah, it crashes, right? So because it just can't render this shit. So the amount of vertices, oh yeah, I can see that, because there's so many symbols in there, it just like overflow the buffer, which is actually fine because it probably saved it from crashing my entire system. So I'm gonna keep it like that. But in the future, the renderer should be flushing the thing, flushing the renderer, the buffer, when we have too many vertices, right? So yeah, that's what it needs to be doing. But for now, it's fine. So we got rid of that. And there is another interesting thing. I don't like that the editor is actually zooms out too much when the lines are too big, right? When the lines are too big. And it zooms out based on the max length line, max line len, right? It zooms out based on that shit, right? So we set it in here and we compute the max line len, right? And after that, if it's greater than 0, we just do that. There is another interesting thing, is that, let's say if max line len is greater than, let's say 1, maybe 500, we're gonna keep it at 500. Right, so it's not gonna get bigger than that. We're only using it for the zoom, right? So we're gonna only use it for the zoom. All right, so okay, and it keeps like that. Okay, so maybe I can even make it 1000. Yeah, let's make it 1000. So it zooms out, but then it stops around here, which is nice, which is precisely what I want. Okay, so now I can try to open build SH, and now I have build SH. Right, so that's fine. So let me try to open something else. License, I can open the license, I can do something, but I can't really save it right now. I think, right, because I don't really set the current file path, because when I press F2, SDLK F2, right, SDLK F2, it uses the file path to do this thing, so it's not particularly useful. And the file path currently is located in a temporary buffer, right, in a temporary buffer, so it all may create some really weird situation, right? But what we can do, we can essentially override the file path and never reset the temporary buffer and just let it leak. Yeah. Just never free in the memory solves so many issues. It's insane. Right, so okay. So I can say something like hello chat, and I can press F2 in here, and then I can open a different file, for instance readme, right. But then if I go back to the license, it's still there, and if I close this entire thing and I open the license in Emacs, here is the hello chat. So I can kind of navigate in files now, right, and edit them. And then, so essentially what I can do, I can open a file, edit it, save it, then open another file, and all of that within a single session, right? Of course, this entire thing is not finished yet. This is more of a sketch of the feature, of the final feature that I want to implement. So this is roughly how I want it to look, right? Of course, some of the things not really working well, but this is like the main idea in here, right? For instance, I can't go into the directory, right? So for now, I can't really do anything. Buy more RAM. Well, I mean, it's kind of funny that it actually failed in here, and this is Yeah, this is because I try to take the size of the folder, and I think on Linux, if you try to take the size of the folder, it gives you the maximum value of integer or something like that. So obviously it couldn't work it out. We have to handle that. There's a lot of things here that don't work, but this is more of a like a, again, sketch of an idea. So we also need to be able to press on the folder and go inside of the folder. But that requires keeping track of the current path or something like that. You know what I mean? Right. So that's what it requires. But that's already kind of outside of the scope. But you can open a file. You can do something here. Right. So test. Test. You can save it, and then you can close it. And was it in readme? I forgot what was the file though. I forgot in which file I did. Yeah, there we go. Here's the test. Here it is. Here it is. Isn't that poggers, my dudes? Isn't that poggers? I think it's pretty freaking poggers. So I guess I'm gonna call it today. So I just basically outlined the feature that I want, and I'm gonna clean everything up off screen. Right. So, and the editor is going to have a built-in file browser, which you can actually use to pick files and start edit. This feels so nice. I absolutely love it. My God, this is so cool. Yeah, boy. Yeah, boy. Yeah, boy. Works. All right. Does anyone have any questions? Does anyone have any questions? Let me take a look. Preferably on topic questions. Let it leak, let it leak, let it leak, oh let it leak. Memory costs nothing, let it leak. Pretty poggy woogie. When it zooms out, it starts looking crunchy. Any thoughts on that? This is the encoding of Twitch, or just general video encoding. So on my end, it actually looks awesome. Trust me. How well does it edit large files? Pretty badly, because it's unfinished, as you can see. The software is unfinished. If it was finished and was doing everything well, I wouldn't be not sitting here and writing it, because it would have been already written. But since I'm sitting here and implementing it, that means it's finished. Yes, kawaii freaking this. Okay, alright, so that's it for today. Thanks everyone who's watching me right now. I really appreciate that. Have a good one, and I see you all on the next Azuzian session. I love you all.